What's going on, people? Welcome back to another episode of the FF Ball Busters podcast. My name is Will. That's my co host, Eric. And today we're going to be going through our tier list of the 2024 rookies. Now that the NFL draft has happened, we know where everybody's at. So we're going to get into that, let you guys know where we think these guys fall on the tier list. But before we get into that, Eric, you got anything for the people?
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys are enjoying the content, please do leave a like on the video. That would help us out a ton. If you guys haven't already, if you're new to the channel, whatever the case may be, hit that subscribe button. I think you guys are really going to enjoy what we have over here. And also, if you guys want to stay up to date with all of our latest videos, don't want to miss any of our releases, hit that notification bell as well. And then the last thing, if you guys have any specific questions for us that you want answered, feel free to drop them down in the comments below or hit that link in the description to our Discord. Either way, whichever way you prefer, we'd be more than happy to engage with you and also help you out in any way we can. But yeah, with that, I'm excited to get into this tier list.
Absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and swap over here. We're going to go over to Tier Maker and we're going to go ahead and jump into it. Eric, who do you have leading off our tier list?
Yeah, so the S tier I think has become pretty clear as we've gotten through some rookie drafts. We've seen some ADP. We've done some of our home league drafts already. Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. seem to be the clear top guys, which we knew. That's not any surprise. But I think that there's a clear tier break after that. And even personally, I think that Caleb might belong in a tier by himself, but just based on ADP and what we've seen from the general public, it seems like these two guys can be lumped together.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I've seen a mixture of these guys going one and two, kind of in whatever order, each league kind of deems necessary. But either way, they're the top end of the talent for this draft right here and landed in great spots.
Absolutely.
Taking a look at the next group that we're going to be looking at, we're looking at the A tier. Who do we have here? It's going to be Mr. Jaden Daniels. I'm taking a look down here to see where he's at. I'm sorry, guys, if you see me looking down. And we've got who landed with the Washington Commanders. And we've also got Malik Neighbors, who landed with the New York Giants. Just two guys we feel like Malik Neighbors kind of walks in with a pretty high floor immediately because there's no great receiving talent really in New York. So he should walk in immediately as the clear cut number one and at least get a lot of targets to start out with. How meaningful they are with Daniel Jones throwing the ball back there, who really knows? But at a certain point, you're getting a wide receiver who, for multiple years to come, is going to be the wide receiver one for the New York Giants. It's just a matter of if they're going to end up getting someone back there who can get the ball to him efficiently. And I got a feeling they're going to be working on that one pretty quick outside of this season. And then with Jaden Daniels landing in Washington, second overall, he's got a pretty good receiver core in Terry McLaurin and Josh Doxson and newly acquired Luke McCaffrey. Did I say Josh Doxson?
You
Jahan
did,
Dotson.
yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah,
Throwback.
you don't even want to know my thoughts on Josh Doxson. But Jahan Dotson, newly acquired Ben Sinnott at tight end, and Zach Ertz as well. So he's got a good cast around him. It's just a matter of how they're going to be able to implement him, and plus the rushing floor just adds even more to his value here. So that's why I got him right here in this B tier,
Yeah, and I think, or A tier, right?
A tier. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're good. But no, I like that point a lot. I think the rushing floor is kind of what separates him and situation a little bit because I think Drake May and JJ McCarthy aren't too far behind Jaden. But I could see Jaden Daniels having at least that early career path of like a Justin Fields, where even if he's not as developed as a passer, his rushing floor is going to allow him to be a great fantasy asset and producer early on. Um, and whether or not you believe in his long-term future, you probably will have a good sell window there where his value is really high. So I think he belongs up here in the A tier.
Absolutely.
And then we can move on to the next one, the B tier here, where the rest of the, or not the rest, but a couple of the other quarterbacks we just mentioned fall in line. Drake May with the New England Patriots, JJ McCarthy in a great situation there in Minnesota. And then also the other kind of elite skill position players with Roma Dunze in Chicago and Brock Bowers in Vegas make their way into my B tier. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think with Roma Dunze, it's going to take a little bit of time, but he's going to be the guy in Chicago for sure at some point. And then Brock Bowers is going to be the guy wherever he landed at. And, Las
Yeah.
Vegas is just another place.
Yeah, it's a tough situation, which is why he kind of ends up closer to the back end of this tier. With the lack of quarterback clarity, I think Gardner Minshew, he's proven to get tight ends involved. At least he did in Indianapolis, and so I think he can still do it here. And then also the fact that Michael Mayer's still there, Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, like there's a lot going on that makes this not ideal. But like you said, he's a generational prospect, and we can trust that talent regardless of the situation. Any comments on the quarterbacks here? I mean, pretty clear that they belong in the tier, but just your thoughts in general.
So they're in the tier. Drake May is in more of a what I feel like is a rebuilding situation where, the team's kind of retooling, kind of figuring out their new identity, especially with the new head coach, new coaching staff. So we really don't know what we're going to get out of Drake May really at all. It's just kind of a mystery, but at the same time, there's a lot of potential to be found in that mystery. So, it's give and take there. But with JJ McCarthy, we know kind of exactly what he's walking into. Kevin O'Connell led team with Justin Jefferson on the outside, Jordan Addison on the outside. You got why am I forgetting his name right now? TJ Hawkinson at tight end. You got a lot of talent out there for JJ McCarthy to get the ball to, but we don't know what he can really do on the football field to his fullest extent. So it's weird where we know what his situation is, but we don't know who he is as a player, where we know who Drake May is kind of as a player, but we don't know the situation. So it's kind of whichever one you want to buy into there at that point.
Completely agree with that. Yeah, let's move on to the C tier here, where we start off with your boy, Bo
Absolutely.
Nix.
Mr. Bo Nix is going to lead off this tier. Honestly, him landing with Denver, I think is a great spot. I think that his talents are going to fit a Sean Payton, offense team sort of situation. So I just think it's perfect for him. They brought in Troy Franklin, who played with him in college. So that chemistry is going to be there immediately. Marvin Mims is there with the team, Cortland Sutton. Like, there's a good group of guys around him, too. Like, so he's walking into a pretty decent situation as well. It's just a matter of if he's going to get it done on the field out there, which is the biggest question mark. But just to fill out the rest of this tier, we've also got Mr. Jonathan Brooks, who landed with the Carolina Panthers. We've also got Ladd McConkey, who landed with the Los Angeles Chargers, who should be probably the wide receiver one, at least in terms of
Yeah,
volume out there for sure.
yeah.
We got Brian Thomas, who landed with Jacksonville, who fills out a role that the team needs. So, in terms of fantasy viability, I think he's going to be a guy who's going to score, a good amount of points. I don't know how consistent it's going to be based on the role that he's going to have with the offense, but he's probably going to be good for splash plays pretty often, especially with this team. The rest of the guys we got out here, we got Xavier Worthy, who landed with Kansas City. An interesting one. We can talk about that one a little bit more when we got this more filled out. And then Ricky Pearsall, who landed with the San Francisco 49ers. So what do you think about this group?
So it's a bigger group, and
Yeah.
we have them all tiered together. So I'm not necessarily going to be upset with anybody taking one of these guys over the other. I do think maybe we're in the minority here, just based on the ADP that I've seen. But having Bo Nix and Jonathan Brooks at the top doesn't seem to be consensus. Obviously, you've been a fan of Bo Nix for a long time, and I've started to come around after hearing your arguments for him and seeing, especially the landing spot. I really like where he went and the draft capital involved to get him there. And then Jonathan Brooks, I think, is incredibly talented. I think he's going to be recovered from the ACL in time to be productive from week one. Carolina did just add Rashad Penny, but that doesn't really bother me at all. I don't see that as an obstruction necessarily. And I think that he could be very productive early on in his career, and by the end of the season, potentially be within the top 10 dynasty running backs. And I think that's incredibly valuable at the end of the first round. So I'm happy to have him there. And then Ladd McConkey, I think you're absolutely right. Volume wise, is going to be the wide receiver one there and has the potential. I'm not predicting it necessarily, but has a legitimate shot to be the rookie wide receiver one in redraft leagues this year.
Hmm.
Just with the amount of volume that he's going to see and the area of the field that he works in relation to what Justin Herbert is good at. Um, so I like his fit. You mentioned Xavier Worthy. Obviously, the upside is there. We've
Hmm.
seen what he can do from an explosiveness standpoint, and he adds that layer back to that offense that we haven't really seen since Tyreek Hill. He's not Tyreek Hill. Nobody's Tyreek Hill. I wouldn't put that expectation on him, but I do think he provides a good vertical stretch and kind of threat for that offense that they haven't had in a little bit. I just don't know that that means, similar to what you said with Brian Thomas, consistency from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah. And then with Ricky Pearsall, it's just a great landing spot for him. It's kind of the perfect landing spot for him. There's just a lot of competition ahead of him at the moment with Brandon Ayuk and Debo Samuel still there. And I think the latest report we got was that they aren't planning on trading either of them now. I'm not sure how true that one is. I don't know what exactly they're
Yeah.
planning over there, but they picked up two wide receivers in this draft that have good, that are profiled well for us, and we feel like could be good on the NFL field. So it's tough to really say what direction they're going in with this group.
Yeah, obviously this one is the most dependent of the entire group upon what happens with trade or no trade. And so it could come back to bite you a little bit. But I feel like if the opportunity arises, he could easily find himself in a very fantasy valuable role there if one of those two top guys ends up out of town.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we can go on to the D tier here, a smaller group for us and filled by two guys that we weren't favorites or didn't have as favorites in the pre-draft process. We got Keon Coleman, who ended up with the Buffalo Bills, and we got Xavier Legette, who ended up with the Carolina Panthers. Legette going as the 32nd pick overall in the first round, and Keon right behind him as the first pick in the second round, if I'm not mistaken. What are your thoughts on these two guys and where they ended up?
So, draft capital wise, we can't ignore either of them. As much as we've talked about Xavier Leggett, as much as we've downgraded Keon Coleman throughout the process, they ended up getting the draft capital regardless. And, we can't ignore that at all. Keon Coleman stepping into a spot that's very interesting because he could immediately be the wide receiver one in Buffalo. Now, it also could take a little bit of time because he's a rookie getting used to the new offense, and they've still got guys who have been there, like Khalil Shakir may get the early nod, in terms of receiving. But I think over time, Keon Coleman's going to end up taking that spot, and I think he landed in the perfect spot for his specific skill set in terms of winning 50-50 balls and landing with a quarterback who was willing to throw them. Josh Allen is more than willing to put those up. So it's going to be interesting to see what Keon Coleman can do. But with Xavier Leggett, it's tough because he's not a good separator, but he is another guy who's got a good frame to him and can beat DBs in terms of like contested catches, stuff like that. But it's tough to see what exactly he's going to do out there, but I think paired alongside Deontay Johnson as well, I think that may take a little bit less attention away from him just because Deontay Johnson is as good of a separator as he is. So it's tough to say with these two guys. I think the range of outcomes for Keon Coleman, the ceiling can be a little bit higher than Xavier Legette, but I think these are two guys that their ceilings are pretty interesting in terms of where they could land at.
Yeah, definitely some boom bust profiles that we're looking at here. Keon, especially, I think, landed in a great situation, which you mentioned. Not a guy that I anticipated to be high on, and I think in this position, based on ADP, we're not high on him, but we're also not like extremely low either. I think he's kind of sitting there right in a happy medium area. But yeah, I think you nailed it with the fact that Josh Allen's going to be willing to throw the ball to him in situations where he's at his best, which is those contested catch and 50-50 situations. And yeah, Xavier Legette, just with the opportunity on a team where they don't have somebody that can do what he does. I think they hoped Jonathan Mingo would be that, and clearly that experiment didn't work out. We'll see if this is Jonathan Mingo 2.0 or not, but I think I'm at least a little bit more intrigued by the profile than I was with Mingo last year.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely.
All right, so we can go on to the E tier. We got a lot of names coming up, so we can run through these a little bit faster, maybe just talk about our favorites of the group. But in the E tier, we do have Michael Penix. Sorry if you've been waiting on this one. We were going back and forth before we started the video about how high we wanted to put him, how low we wanted to put him. Hopefully, this is kind of right in the middle of the range where we think he probably deserves to be just based on that draft capital. Then we have Troy Franklin, who goes to the Denver Broncos. We have Adonai Mitchell, who goes to the Indianapolis Colts. Ben Sinnott, who I think lands in a pretty good situation there in Washington. Stop me if I'm going too fast, by the
You're
way,
good.
Will. Okay. Jermaine Burton, wide receiver, going to the Cincinnati Bengals. Jalen Polk getting drafted pretty highly, I think, with the 37th overall pick there to New England. And his running mate, his fourth-round wide receiver, Javon Baker. Blake Corum, running back, goes to the Rams. Trey Benson in Arizona, and Jalen Wright to Miami.
Gotcha. Yep, got them all listed out.
All right. So I'll throw to you favorites from this group, guys that are the most intriguing, or any thoughts on ADP, just general thoughts here.
So, guys that I think are the most intriguing out of the group, the three that really jump out at me a lot, I've got Ben Sinnott for Washington. I've got Jermaine Burton for Cincinnati, just because he's someone who's interesting. And I've also got Jalen Polk for New England. So, which is kind of a 50-50 with Javon Baker, because I'm sure you're going to talk about that side of things. But taking a look at Ben Sinnott, he's really the first tight end that Washington has had in a while that is a pure tight end. And out of like the guys who kind of got drafted in this process, outside of Brock Bowers, because he's the generational guy. We're not really comparing him to him. But when we're looking at Ben Sinnott, he's probably one of the more well-rounded out of all of these guys in terms of blocking, in terms of receiving, route running, stuff like that. He's sort of a jack of all trades. So with him fitting with Washington, especially if you're in a league that's tight end premium, he's a guy who I could see people taking a shot on the end of the second round. We've seen early first round as well. Or not early first, I'm sorry, early third round as well. So the
Yeah.
capital has been sort of in that range from like the 208 to the 303. And I think that that's a really good spot to pick up a guy like that. When we're looking at Jermaine Burton, he went to Cincinnati. We're not exactly sure what's going to happen with T. Higgins out there. So if he is to get traded, I think Jermaine Burton, there's a case for him to even move up this tier list some. But as of right now, I think this is a good spot for him, even as just being the possible wide receiver 3 with that team. And when we're looking at Jalen Polk with the New England, obviously it's him and Javon Baker, so we don't know who's going to be the wide receiver 1. Out of the two, I'm looking a little bit more towards Jalen Polk, but I could also see a side for Javon Baker as well. I think that Jalen Polk provides a more of a, I guess, more of a possession threat, stuff like that, whereas Javon Baker could be more of a splash play, big play kind of guy. But what do you think about these guys in this tier?
Yeah, so Jermaine Burton is either my first or second biggest value in the entire draft, in my opinion. I think
Mm-hmm.
he's going to be when we look back at this 3 years down the road, we're going to be like, how could we possibly get him in the late second, early third round? I think he's incredibly talented. We talked about it in our My Guys video, how much I loved him as a prospect. But I think the situation is fantastic also. We've seen the route participation and the involvement that Tyler Boyd has had as the wide receiver 3 here. And so I think that Jermaine Burton has value immediately, even though
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be the most consistent, not going to be a ton of volume. He's going to have value. And you mentioned with T. Higgins, I think the most likely outcome, we can't necessarily predict it with any. I can't guarantee it, but
Mm-hmm.
I can predict that I think he's probably not going to be there in 2025. And so Jermaine Burton walks in as the wide receiver 2 next year, tied to Joe Burrow. Like, come on. I don't see how this one. I was going to say I don't see how this one fails. The way it fails is unfortunately potentially the off the field issues that have kind of plagued him, or at least been talked about around him. But if he can make sure that that's under control, I think the talent is absolutely there for him to be an amazing value.
Absolutely agree with that one right there. Absolutely.
And if you guys watched our My Guys video, or if you haven't, I talked about Javon Baker. He's one of my favorite of the group. I think Jalen Polk is a really good receiver. I liked all the points that you made, and I think that he probably will be that security blanket for Drake May early on. But yeah, Javon Baker, I just think has a slightly higher ceiling in terms of the skill set that he brings. And so draft capital indicates that Jalen Polk is the higher investment, the guy that's going to get more opportunity. But if Javon Baker can prove himself, I think that he has a pretty high top end range of outcomes.
Absolutely. If he plays anything like how he talks with all the bring the popcorn, yeah, bro. I think he's going to be somebody who's going to stick around for a while.
Absolutely.
And
All right.
then taking
And
a
then
look at the next tier,
yeah, you go.
guys, this is going to be a big tier right here. This is the one where I think we kind of reached the range right here in drafts where you just kind of go and get your guy. There's no real ADP. There's no real, this guy's definitely better than the next. It's whoever you believe in as a player or whoever you believe in terms of the situation here. So this is going to be a big tier, and we're going to go through, I guess, the guys we value the most here. So going one by one, we're going to take a look. We got Malachi Corley here to start it off. We've got, wow, my goodness, man, these names. Ray Davis to Buffalo right here. We've got Roman Wilson to Pittsburgh. We've got Luke McCaffrey, who ended up with the Washington Commanders. I was about to say McCanders.
Washington McCaffrey's.
Yeah, McCaffrey's is crazy. We got Jatavion Sanders. We've got Audric Estime, who landed with Denver. We've got Bucky Irving. We've got, oh my goodness, bro, there's so many names. Kamani Vidal, who landed with the Chargers. Stay with me here, guys. We got AJ Barner, who landed with the Seahawks. We've
So
got,
actually, that one was in there to represent Tyrone Tracy because
ooh,
Tyrone Tracy isn't in this list. So
okay.
sorry about that one.
Okay, so that is Tyrone Tracy, guys. That's not AJ Barner. So just make sure you guys see that. We got Jarrett Wiley, who landed with the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm sorry, guys. There's a lot of guys here. We got Jacob Cowing, Jalen McMillan, Malik Washington. Why am I missing him right here? And Theo Johnson.
And we actually have two more in there. I don't know if they got cut off, but Marshawn Lloyd and Eric All also belong in that category.
Oh, I did put Marshawn Lloyd. I forgot Eric Cole. There we go.
Okay, all right, cool, cool, cool. Um, as Will said at the top, don't pay attention to the order in which these names were put in here. This is really get your guy season, and we're going to talk about our favorites of this group. So I'll let you kick it off, Will. Who are some guys that you're targeting amongst this F tier?
So, some guys I'm targeting in this F tier, I've been looking at Audric Estime here to the Denver Broncos, just because I feel like the situation is kind of interesting. Obviously, I like Javonte Williams as a player. I think that he's going to get more burn this year, but I'm not really sure if the coaching staff is bought in on Javonte Williams at this point. But with bringing Audric Estime and having him alongside Jaleel McLaughlin as well, that could be an interesting pairing of the two if the team decides they want to move on from Javonte Williams. If not, and he is just a part of a committee, I still think Audric Estime still has a good amount to carve out in this offense. He's a guy in college who showed a lot of receiving ability alongside the between the tackles work, so he's pretty good all around. And another guy I wanted to talk about in this grouping is Bucky Irving, who landed with Tampa Bay. Now, obviously, he's alongside Rachaad White, who had a really good season. We've talked about this before on this channel. But with Bucky Irving landing alongside, he's pretty much a very similar running back to Rachaad White, but younger, a little bit more explosive. So it's going to be really interesting, at least for me, to see how this backfield ends up shaking out in terms of who ends up doing what, because I don't see a repeat season out of Rachaad White coming. So it may be Bucky Irving's season coming soon, and hopefully we see more of that player we saw on tape and not so much the guy we saw at the Combine.
Yeah, no, I like those a lot. I also have two running backs to highlight here, one of which being Kamani Vidal out of Troy, who goes to the Los Angeles Chargers. I think there's also a decent path to upward trajectory there with J.K. Dobbins. We don't know what the recovery from his injury is going to look like. He's got Gus Edwards also in front of him. But, Gus benefited from a great system. And I'm not saying that he's not talented, but I also don't think that he's necessarily so talented that he's going to keep a guy like that off the field. Kamani Vidal, I genuinely think is a really talented running back. He just went to a small school, and so a lot of people don't know that much about him. But he's 215 pounds, even at his shorter stature, and I think that he comps fairly well to a guy like DeAndre Swift. And so he has that explosiveness, and I think he might even be even better in between the tackles in terms of just his vision and consistency in terms of success rate. So I really like what he could provide if he's able to carve out a role there in LA. And then Marshawn Lloyd, I think, is somebody that we should talk about as well. I've kind of gone back and forth about how I feel about him, but I looked into Josh Jacobs' contract recently, and he has an out after this first season. Even though it's a 4-year deal, they have the opportunity to cut bait basically immediately after this year. And Marshawn Lloyd is a guy that also comps fairly well to a guy that was in Green Bay and Aaron Jones, more of that kind of explosive playmaker in space. Obviously, Aaron Jones is incredibly talented and one of the best backs and has been in the league for a long time. I think Marshawn Lloyd has a long way to get there, but that's kind of his upside case. And so obviously they know how to use that type of running back there in Green Bay.
Which I feel like if that's a guy you're buying in, late third round, mid third round, early fourth round, yeah, I'd take a chance on that as well. I like that one right there too.
100%. And then just some guys that we don't need to go in depth, but I want to mention Eric All, Iowa tight end. We always vouch for the Iowa tight ends here on this channel.
Mm-hmm.
He goes to Cincinnati in a pretty good landing spot there with not a ton of competition. It's just whether he stays healthy or not. So I think that's a pretty good landing spot. Jacob Cowing, a guy that was on my guy list. But again, just a weird situation whether or not any receivers end up getting traded. I think he's incredibly talented, but you got to worry about opportunity there. And then Luke McCaffrey, I feel like is probably falling later than maybe he should be. He's been in the fourth round of a lot of drafts. I don't know that he belongs all the way down there, and he's just probably going to have some good opportunity in Washington.
Honestly, like if Jahan Dotson shows again what he did last year, if he's anything like that, Luke McCaffrey is going to get a lot of burn very early on because Curtis Samuel was strangely productive for the last couple years for this team, and Luke McCaffrey's kind of sliding right into that role.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and somebody else I wanted to talk about in this list, not because I want you guys to draft him, but Braylon Allen, man, R.I.P. But with that being said, we can go ahead and move on to the last one. Who do we have in this last tier?
We can talk about the quarterbacks first, just because you probably want to dart throw on those guys. Spencer Rattler ends up. I don't know why it says
Yeah, it says
he's
New York
labeled here as the
Giants
Jets.
or Jets. Sorry.
Yeah, but he goes to the Saints.
Yeah.
And then Jordan Travis does end up with the Jets. Um, and then it's the running backs, Isaac Guerrero, who's also labeled as a tight end on here, weirdly, and then Will Shipley, who goes to the Eagles.
Yeah, that's weird. But what do you think about these guys right here for the quarterbacks at the back end? Because I think they're interesting at the very least.
Yeah,
Not exciting,
this
but
might
interesting.
this might be more anecdotal than anything, but the Spencer Rattler pick is funny to me because it's so opposite of Derek Carr. Like a lot of times, if you believe in your starter, you want to bring in somebody with kind of a redundant skill set or somebody that you think would do fill a similar role, do the similar kind of things, and fit well into that offense. They were like, nah, give me somebody totally different. So like maybe they're hoping that Spencer Rattler can be something more, that he can turn into the future starter. Um, Honestly, I didn't love what we saw from him on tape. I think he's a good leader. I think he improved a ton as like a person, from where he started in Oklahoma to where he ended up in South Carolina. And so I think he's got a good head on his shoulders. But you know, didn't love what I saw from his college career.
Yeah, like you said, I think it does say a lot, at least to be able to move from situation to situation and still, find yourself in a situation where you could get drafted into the NFL. I think there is a lot to at least say about that. And like you said, him having a good head on his shoulders. But I don't know. I guess we'll see if anything happens to Derek Carr. Not saying I hope it does, but if something happens to Derek Carr, we'll see what Spencer Rattler can provide at the NFL level. So that one is interesting. And Jordan Travis is interesting too, just because he's a guy who, this is purely just based off of last year. There's no conjecture, there's no prediction going forward. But this is a guy who potentially could play multiple games this year, just
Yeah,
because of what we saw last year. Aaron Rodgers didn't make it past 2 plays.
he could
Yeah.
he could maybe play all year.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Who knows? So Jordan Travis, I'd say he's a talented guy. He's got a different
Oh
skill
yeah,
set compared to a lot of these other guys who kind of got drafted too. And especially with that Jets team, it's a very different look than what Aaron Rodgers provides as well. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting to see if he plays this year and what he can provide too. So like you said, these are two guys who are very interesting.
yeah. I'm intrigued for sure. Um, Garendo is a guy that obviously splashed at the combine, and we liked as a talent. Lands behind Christian McCaffrey, so there's no ability to ascend, but in a change of pace role, and if anything were to happen to McCaffrey, I think that there's a shot that
Hmm.
he can produce. But honestly, they have some vets back there that are also, you know, probably the backup right now.
Yeah, it's the 49ers. They probably got like 6 running backs on the depth chart right now, all ready to go.
Yeah.
And they're going to cycle
Yep.
them in a way we never would have imagined, as per usual.
Yeah. And then a guy that you really liked in the pre-draft process, Will Shipley. Do you have anything to say about that situation?
So I like Will Shipley. I still like Will Shipley. He ended up in Philadelphia, which I don't know if that's the best for Will Shipley, in terms of at least like his talents, because obviously he's decent between the tackles. I'm not going to say he's a zero between the tackles. He's pretty good, but he's behind Saquon Barkley, so it's like he's not better at him than at it. So I don't know if he's going to get the burn there. And
Yeah.
him and Saquon are both good receiving backs, but at the same time, they play for the Eagles with Jalen Hurts, who doesn't throw the ball to running backs very often. So it puts a cap
Yeah.
on everything, but at the very least, Saquon isn't the healthiest running back in the world from season to season. So Will Shipley is a guy who should see the field at some point. And if he's able to make the most out of those situations, he could see the field even more afterwards. So I like Will Shipley here.
Yeah. Clearly, based on the way that we've been talking about these guys, it makes sense that they're in this bottom tier, but
Yeah.
they do have a little bit of upside potentially. Any guys that aren't on the list that you want to talk about? I got like two names that I want to bring up, but do you have any kind of guys that you think could be valuable UDFAs for your dynasty teams?
Not off the top of my head. I haven't gotten into a whole lot of undrafted free agents. I've been trying to keep up with the best I can, but I haven't seen a ton of them yet.
That's totally fair. Clearly, based on this last group, there's not a ton of reason for optimism, but I do think that Dylan Lobby, however you pronounce it, from New Hampshire, that goes to the Las Vegas Raiders. I think he can carve out a role as that third down pass catching back. Um, Fairly early on, and I think that actually on tape he looked pretty good in between the tackles as well. I don't know that that's necessarily ever going to come to fruition, but he could be like Danny Woodhead potentially. Like maybe that's the upside case for him, and that's pretty decent. Um, and then also, what's his name? Blake Watson. He ends up in Denver, a guy that went really under the radar. And I know that you talked about Audric Estime. I like
Mm-hmm.
Audric Estime, and I think that he's got a good shot to produce. Blake Watson, if the team's not sold on Jaleel McLaughlin,
Mm-hmm.
however you say that, I think he has a real opportunity to do similar to what I talked about with Dylan Lobby. He could be that third down back, but he's even bigger. He's a little bit more rocked up. He could potentially take even more volume and be an RB1 if he gets there, but there's so much in his way to potentially getting to that spot that obviously, hard to predict that.
Okay. No, that would be interesting though. I would like to see that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's all I got. I know that this was a longer video, but obviously we wanted to give you guys a look into the ADP that we've seen over the past couple of weeks now that rookie drafts have gotten started, and our personal experience now that we've gotten through a few of our home leagues and other rookie drafts and stuff like that. I think we'll probably do another video this week where we talk about our favorite values and maybe guys to avoid in rookie drafts based on their ADP. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, if you guys could do all that good YouTube stuff that we talked about at the top, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're new or if you just haven't gotten around to it yet, hit the notification bell, and drop down comments below what you think about this list. Any questions you have about where you should be drafting guys, let us know, and we'd be more than happy to answer you. But Will, do you have anything else to say to the people before we head out of here?
Absolutely. Make sure you guys check out those links down in the description below to all of our partners over at Do Numbers and Choice Music Group for just great merchandise, music, stuff of that nature. And also check out the link to our Discord below as well. Join the community. We got a lot of great guys in there, especially this time of year with all the drafts going on. It's been kind of crazy in the Discord. So if you guys are interested in that or just want some extra advice, stuff like that, hit up the Discord. The link will be down to that below. And yeah, join the community, have some fun with us. But with that being said, if you guys made it this far into the video, as always, we love you, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.